gets married. Up in heaven, Thor the Thunder God was furious. Someone had stole his magic hammer. Thor's magic hammer was the terror of the gods. Whenever he threw it, it killed anything that it touched, and it always returned to his hand. It was perhaps the most deadly weapon that the gods possessed to protect them against their enemies and the giants. Now the raging Thor's roaring sound was like the clouds were clashing together. His face was so black with anger that it sent a dark shadow over the whole sky. As Thor grabbed blazing lightning bolts and hurled them, the mischief-maker god Loki came nervously to see him. "I have good news, my angry friend," Loki explained. "I have used my cunning to find out that the giant Thrym, who stole your hammer, and he's agreed to give it back under one condition, and that is that he has the most beautiful of all the goddesses, Freya, as his bride." Thunder God's sulky face brightened a little, and he chanced off to find Freya straight away. "Put on your best dress, Freya," Thor boomed, throwing open her wardrobe doors. "You have to marry the giant so that I can get my magic hammer back." Freya's eyes flickered with cold fire. "Excuse me?" she said calmly. "Would you care to repeat that?" "You have to marry the giant Thrym so I can get my magic hammer back." The impatient Thunder Guard stopped, cried at top speed. Freya stood glaring, her hands on her hips. "Firstly, Thor, as the goddess of beauty, I don't have to do anything." Thor's face reddened. "Secondly," Freya continued, "I wouldn't marry that ugly monster if he were the only creature left in the world." The ashamed Thunder God hung his head. "Thirdly," Freya finished, "it's your problem. You sort it out." "Sorry, Freya," Thor mumbled, shuffling about a bit. Then he turned and stormed back to Loki. The two gods sat down gloomily and racked their brains to come up with another way to get the hammer back. "How about," Thor started to suggest. Then he shook his head. No. "What if," Loki began. Then his face fell. No, that would never work. It was as if Thor's magic hammer would have to stay in the land of the giants forever, until the god Heimdall had an idea. "That's absolutely out of the question," Thor thundered. "Outrageous," Loki squealed. "I'll never do it." "Well, you can't come up with another plan then." Heimdall laughed, knowing that there wasn't one. That night, the giant was delighted to see a chariot with a bride and a bridesmaid in it, rambling up to his castle. "It's Freya!" the gumless giant gasped with delight. "I shall gladly give back Thor's magic hammer in return for the most beautiful wife in the world." The overjoyed giant commanded a magnificent banquet to be prepared and his guests to be sent for at once. But Thrym wouldn't have been so overjoyed if he could have seen what was underneath the veils of his bride and bridesmaid. The angry, highly embarrassed faces of Thor and Loki. As it was, the giant was far too excited to notice how big and clumsy his bride and bridesmaid looked in their frilly dresses. Thrym didn't take in that the women had low, gruff voices and huge, hairy hands, and he hardly thought twice about the way Freya swagged down 2 whole barrels of beer and ate an entire roast ox. When the guests had eaten and drinking their fill, the beaming Thrym stood to make a speech. "My wife and I," he began, blushing bright red, "would like to thank you for celebrating this happiest of occasions with us. Freya has made me the luckiest being in the universe, and now I will keep my word and give back the magic hammer I stole from that ugly thug of a thunder god." There was a roll of drums as one of Thrum's servants brought the magic hammer on a cushion. Thrum held it high in the air for his marveling guests to admire. Then, with a grand flourish, he presented it to his bride. "The ugly thug of a thunder god thanks you," roared Thor, ripping off his veils and springing to his feet. And before Thrum and his guests could really take in the trick, they were all lying dead on the floor, and the wedding feast was unexpectedly over. All the gods were truly relieved to have the magic hammer back in Thor's hands in heaven, where it belonged. But it was a long time before Thor and Loki could laugh with the other gods about how charming they both looked in the dresses. The end. I hoped you like it. I miss you and I love you all my heart. Mwah.